So today we are going to take a look at thinking in type, and this book is all about typography. So typography is the study of, or not the study, but it's the art of how you are conveying information through words, more specifically, not the words themselves, but the shape of the words, the space, the font, all of this goes into it, and it goes into it in a really subtle way. And the way I like to think about this, the elegance of typography is it's like if you've ever forgotten to take your sunglasses off and you forget they're on your head and everything's just darker, it colors everything a certain shade, right? And that changes the way you're looking at it in a way that you are not very aware of because you are looking through the glasses, right? As opposed to if the glasses are sitting on the table, you're looking at the glasses, right? When you look through something, it changes how you see things, but in a way that you can't appreciate because it's not what you're looking at. This is kind of how I like to think of typography as the sort of glasses we're looking at when we are reading written information. Because a lot of it can affect the way we look at things, and it does it in a way that we aren't aware of because we're not looking at the typography. And if we are looking at the typography, then it's probably too disruptive. So if your attention is focused on the typography, like when people do the thing where they alternate between uppercase and lowercase which is meant to like signify trolley voice, actually that's a good use of typography. But when you are simulating, if you're looking at the type itself, you're not focused on what the type is saying, right? And the entire point is to get you to focus correctly on what the type is saying. So a brief example of something that would be an example of good typography is when you often look at titles or headers of sections when you're reading something. Often they are sans serif, which means they don't have on the letters, they don't have the little pointy things coming out from the edges. And what this does is sans serif is better at capturing attention, which is what the header is meant to do. But then when you go to the body paragraph of it, most of it is serif. And the reason for this is that it is easier on the eyes to read serif for a long period of time. So you'll see body paragraphs of stuff, serif, and then headers, sans serif. Because when you are trying to capture someone's attention, you want it to be as attention capturing as possible. When you are trying to just retain their attention and have them finish what they're reading, you want it to be as comfortable as possible. Another example of this, you might notice this on websites, huge margins. Okay, on stuff that's written. One of the reasons behind having huge margins is if you have too many words per line, it's fatiguing to read. So this is a typography-informed sort of design choice to create that large margins that just are empty space often on websites for the purpose of making the written portion easier to read. And when you see the huge margins, often you're not thinking, oh, it's going to be easier to read, this is perfect. You instead it's just easier to read, which is an example of something you're looking through the typography elements. I think I've talked a little bit long about typography itself and less about the book. The book is gorgeous. Okay, about half the book is visual sorts of examples of the typography. So on one side, they have text, and on another side, they have, examples of various typographical sort of things. You have stuff like empty space is really important, and not just the text itself, also fonts are important. A lot of stuff goes into it. The book also goes into the history of the typography at the very end, and sort of the best ways to design and capture attention in terms of font and space and design, all that. I think it is a criminally underrated aspect of design. The book also does a lot of interesting stuff where it'll talk about a sort of thing, and then it'll just demonstrate it. So an example is, it used to be the case that the written word, what we do is we read left to right. If you're speaking, if you're if you're listening to this, that's English, right? Obviously, if this was captioned and you were reading in a different language where that's not how it's done, it wouldn't be true. But we read left to right. It used to be the case that you would read left to right, go down, and then right to left, and then down, and then left to right, and then down, and then right to left, right? This is something you can just do. It's not against the rules to have your written language like this, but it makes it harder to read. And so just having left to right repeatedly is a design choice. It's not a design choice you really notice, because it's just always like that, but it happens. Another thing, or not anymore, another thing that used to be the case is there used to be no spaces between words. So it would just all read just a brick of text. This makes it also harder to read. The inclusion of spaces makes it easier to read. And that's not... It's important to note that neither of this, either wrapping the text or exclusion of spaces, neither of this is actually changing the words that are written, right? It's changing the presentation, but it makes it much, much, much easier to read. And what the book will do is it'll have a block of text talking about why it's bad to have no spaces, and it's done with no spaces, and it's a terror to read through. But it's demonstrative because it's showing you how bad it is to read through. And same thing with the wraparound text. And it's these sorts of things we don't really think about, but are important because they sort of reveal how information isn't just raw information. Even text. People think of text as just being it's just raw information. It's not. It's it's going through a filter. It's going through a presentation. And so even when you're presenting text, there is ways to do it that are more effective at communicating the message. And I think this is really important. And the book makes this argument, but not at great length. It's really important to think about how you're communicating your message, because there's so much noise. There's sort of this... there's a book called The Economics of Attention, which kind of talks about this trajectory in a way I really like. But we were in the industrial economy. Things were about manufactured goods, right? And then we entered the information economy, where it was about what you knew and having information. And now we are just in an absolute glut of information, right? You can go on YouTube and just learn anything. Although very suspicious, some of the teachers, still, you can do it. Or there are blogs or just tons of mediums. You can learn. Information is basically free, and there's so much of it. What this means is the throttle is no longer being able to find the information. The throttle is having enough attention to pay to the information. And so what this means for all the people producing the information or the content, or however you want to look at it, is the ability to capture the limited resources attention. It's not information. So we went from industrial, the limited resources physical, information, it's information, and attention, it's the attention. So your ability to capture the information in an effective way is dependent on design. And the design is... part of design is typography. And so if you're thinking about it, or just the modes of presentation, what the book really... the essence of, I think, what's important for the book is, although I love the metaphor of using typography to sort of talk about how you see things through the lenses, the glasses, and you don't even realize you're looking through the typography. But what's important is that conveying information in an effective way, if there's tons of noise and information to be heard, it's just absolutely essential. And there's not much getting away from it. Anyways, I've talked a lot about this. The topic excites me. The book is just gorgeous. Maybe it's not... there's a lot of things in there that just aren't that practical. So let's just get into the ratings, because we're talking about utility anyways. Utility, I give it a 4. And maybe it should just be lower. There's not a lot of practical advice. If you're not in a design field, so if you're in a sort of design field or any sort of content production, I think that this is a useful book to read. Scores above the level, right? It's above 5. But if you're not in that sort of territory and you like never put on presentations or like ever format anything, then this book's really not going to be useful at all. And even if you are doing those stuff, there's a lot of things that are just interesting but not very useful. So like that we used to do text in a wraparound way, and like that's not useful to know that, really. It's just interesting. And it sort of reveals some of the importance of typographical developments, but it's not, I don't think it's going to contribute to your life a lot. So I gave you utility of 4. As much as I like typography, and I think more today, more than ever, the importance of the average person understanding design is just higher. And it's not just because if you want to get your message out, design is important, because the mode of presentation matters. It also matters as just a consumer, because when you understand the design better, you understand how your own attention is being appropriated or being captured by devices rather than usefulness. And so some things are just really good at capturing your attention, not because they're useful, but just because they're good at it. Like sensationalistic news is probably like one of the best examples. It really just pushes your buttons, right? It's easy to pay attention to it, and it's not particularly useful. Like I love to rail on local news, not because they're doing like necessarily a bad job or that sort of thing, but what they cover a lot of is like someone got murdered, and okay, of course that's tragic. But if you look at like death statistics in the United States, for the most part, you don't have to worry about getting murdered. And the news covering people getting murdered, it gets people to not change the channels, so it's good for ratings, so they should be doing it from their perspective. But from your perspective, hearing about murders isn't useful in terms of informing you as a citizen. It would be so much better if they just did tons of specials on heart disease, right? If they were actually trying to, like, help you avoid dying, that would be much better in terms of the information. But instead, it's the good at capturing your attention sort of information. So, from that perspective, understanding typography is useful because understanding design is useful as a citizen to understand when your attention is being appropriated, because your attention is the scarce resource, and so everything's just trying to grab it. Okay, novelty, I give it a 7.5, largely because so this is probably not the only book that you can do to read this sort of thing, but I think that a lot of people don't realize that typography is like a sort of filtration glass lenses that you look through when you see information, and it informs how you look at that information. And understanding that the typography is doing that is, I think, very outside of some people's realities, and just being exposed to that sort of idea at a very basic level can blow people's minds sometimes. So that's why it scored high on novelty. For entertainment, I gave it a 5. I found the book tremendously entertaining, but it does talk about stuff like wraparound text, and it's like, okay, that's not a story. It's like, it's not talking about sex, danger, violence, or anything like that. It's like, and so maybe I think it was pretty neutral on the entertaining. Like when I'm trying to rate it for other people, I find the subject tremendously interesting, so I liked it. For style, I gave it a 7.5. I think that, and this was so hard to rate because I'm trying to separate the written style from all the typographical presentation elements that they are incorporating it, which communicate the message, but not with words. And so it was really hard for me to rate this. Like, if I'm rating it, like in a vacuum, like maybe it's a 9.5 because like the typographical stuff, the demonstrations are so good. And then, but like in terms of the words they use, it was good, but like not just crazy like good prose or anything like that. So I wouldn't rate it that high. So I kind of chose something in the middle where like maybe it's a 6 if I'm rating just the writing, and maybe it's a 9 if I'm like really heavily going into how the author utilizes typography to illustrate a point without saying it. Although usually they're saying it while illustrating it. Like the wraparound text thing, where they're talking how bad wraparound text is in wraparound text, and you're struggling to read it, and you very much understand why it's hard to read if you are reading it like that, right? Or no spaces between words. If you read a sentence about how having no spaces in between words, it can be a very basic sentence, but if it has no spaces, man, it communicates the idea very clearly to you. So, readability, I give it a 9.5. This is the closest, as a general heuristic, I don't think anything should ever get a 10. And I've been doing stuff off of everything's intervals of 0.5. This is the most I've ever wanted to rate something a 10. Because the book is just, it's just like pure readability. Because all the points are illustrated with typography. The typography is excellent. And the message is conveyed through the readability aspects of the text. In a way, while they're saying it, like I don't think I'll ever encounter anything like more that, philosophically speaking, should score higher on readability. So you could consider this a soft 10, I guess. Like talking about how wraparound text is terrible while you're wrapping it around. Okay, it makes it harder to read, so in a sense, maybe that's not readable, but it is in terms of the way you are presenting the idea in text, that is the most effective way you could possibly present it. Doing a wraparound text and talking about how bad it is, there's no better way to present those words than actually just wrapping them around and showing someone. And so, 9.5, 10 out of 10. Tentative, not 10 out of 10. For interest, I gave it a 7.5. I find it tremendously interesting. Maybe it should have scored higher, but I can understand how other people might not find it interesting, so I toned it down maybe a little bit. For an overall rating of a 6.83, which is quite high, in terms of something that is a bit more niche, I think this is like the highest score I've given for something that's like kind of far out of what I would consider a book that would be more mainstreamly consumed. Often the books that I score like quite high are like bestseller type books, and I'm like, and this scores high without being. I don't think I've seen this book like in very many places. Like when I'm on Instagram, like in the Bookstagram streets, I don't see much of this book. I don't think I've ever seen this book, or anything on typography at all. And so I think maybe it's a subject that other people don't find as interesting. I think I certainly find it interesting as a result of my being exposed to other ideas, like I was talking about the attention economy book. I think having read that makes this book more interesting. And so I gave it a 7.5. I think it's really interesting. I would definitely understand if someone didn't find it as interesting. I think if you are, as far as recommendations go, if you've never been exposed to, if design is interesting to you, and you've never been exposed to the idea of how important typography is, I 100% would very strongly recommend this. If what I've been talking about sounds interesting to you, I would recommend the book. If you're just like kind of like, man, I don't know about this, I would not recommend the book. As far as discussion goes, does anyone have anything else on typography or talks about typography that they found particularly interesting or good? I would love to hear it. Also, if you put your comments in the like alternating between uppercase, lowercase, like trolley type presentation, which I think is a funny typographical way of communicating information, that'd be sweet. If you like this video, feel free to mispronounce words. Feel free to give it a like, and if you want to see more stuff like this, feel free to subscribe. If you want to see like different book reviews, feel free to recommend books. and have a good one.